can you introduce yourself to me or to the audience and your project?
Mhm. I'm Kelly Estes.
And I'm Brian Estes, and we're the co-lead executive producers of God Bless Bitcoin.
Can you
And
tell
so God bless. Yep.
Oops,
Oh, sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, God Bless Bitcoin is a film in three parts, basically. The first part addresses our current financial system and the inflation that everybody's feeling. Everybody is feeling the pinch right now. We know that groceries are sky high. We know that a lot of people can't afford to buy a home, rent is high. And some of us are working two, sometimes three jobs, and we can't keep up. So the beginning of the movie explains why that is. And it is because our governments around the world are printing money and diluting our purchasing power. The second part of the movie explains Bitcoin as an alternative form of money. And it, on a macro level, looks at how Bitcoin works and how it can be used as money. The third part of the film then compares and contrasts our current system with Bitcoin through a moral and ethical lens. And here is where we bring in religious experts from across the world's religions to explain what their sacred texts, the Bible, the Torah, the Quran, etc., have to say about how we are to use money and how we are to interact with each other as we use money, so that we can see which one might be the more moral and ethical form of money.
Can you explain why it's called God Bless Bitcoin? Why did you decide on that title?
Okay, it's me again. Sorry, a lot of me talk today. I was the one who came up with the title, and really it is just a little prayer. I want people to think of it as that way, where you say, God, if Bitcoin really is a more moral and ethical form of money, could you bless it so that all of your people would be able to use it and live in abundance the way that you want for us? It's just very simple.
And how do you think this type of currency can be important to Christians, especially in this day of inflation and um, increased government oversights?
Yeah, so Bitcoin is really freedom technology. So if we look back and look at what Bitcoin really is, all it is software that allows us to send value through the internet, like we do, like with email today. When you send an email, you're sending data through the internet. When you use what's called voice over IP, voice over internet protocol, you're sending your voice over the internet. And that's all Bitcoin is. It's the software, it's the open source software, just like email and just like voice over internet protocol. It's money over internet protocol. And it allows us to send value through the internet without having the permission of a bank or PayPal or Visa or MasterCard to block that transaction. And so it's really freedom technology. And for Christians, I mean, God wanted us to be free. And so, this is technology that enables that.
How do you think you mentioned it tying in with uh, the moral teachings. So how does it tie in with the Bible in terms of Christianity?
I think the easiest one for people to understand is the Ten Commandment, thou shalt not steal. Every time that a government prints money and puts it out there in circulation, what it does is it dilutes the value of everybody's dollars or whatever their currency is. And so essentially, it is stealing your time, your effort, your God-given talents from you, your energy, so that the government can have more money to do what it wants with, whether that is wage war, whether that is to pay for social programs, whether that is to pay down a debt that they have incurred. But they are doing it at our expense, by printing that money. And so when you look at it that way, I think you understand that, printing money steals our time. To put it very simply, if you had had $1,000 in your savings account a year ago, today that would only buy you roughly $520 worth of goods and services.
And it was 6 years ago.
And
So
what did I say, five?
you said 1 year ago.
Oh my gosh, sorry, 6 years ago, golly. 6 years ago, today that would buy you $520 worth of goods and services. And nothing happened other than the government printed money and just sucked all of that purchasing power out of your hands. And that's theft.
Yeah. And so when you look at what the Bible says, it says man shall leave his parents and find a wife. And then it also says in Genesis that, you should be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And because, people can't afford to leave their parents, 50%, so 50% of 18 to 30-year-olds are still living at home with their parents. It's at an all-time high. They can't afford to leave their parents, like it says in the Bible. And then they can't afford to find a wife and be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth, like it says in Genesis. And so, it used to be before our money was broken, pre-1971, when we were on the gold standard, you could have like the Brady Bunch. You could have a spouse working and one spouse at home raising the kids. And you could have 6 kids like they had with the Brady Bunch, a maid and a dog, all off of one salary. And today you have both spouses working, and then you have, the barely to be able to afford one child. And so, and all of that's because their money's broken. This all started in 1971 when we went off the gold standard. And so before that, for the 3,000 years before that, we as humans used gold and silver as our money. So governments couldn't print gold and silver, because you had to dig it out of the ground. There was a proof of work there. And what Bitcoin is, it's a digital version of gold. And so this experiment we've been going through for the last 53 years of government printed money, and that's called fiat money. Fiat money means by decree. The government just says a dollar's worth a dollar, but it's not backed by anything. So it's by decree, it's fiat. And that fiat system that we're on is failing. And as we as humans transition back into a hard money standard, like we were on for 3,000 years, it's my opinion that the next hard money will be the digital version of gold, and that's called Bitcoin. And only about 1% of the world understands that today. And so the point of the movie is to help educate people so the other 99% understand, and they could just opt into that system if they want to.
How can people, I'm just curious, how would we go about switching from like the federal currency to a Bitcoin currency? I know there are some people offering that at some locations, but it's very hard to use.
And before he'll explain that very clearly because that's his field, but I also want to make sure that people understand we're not getting rid of, for the United States, we're not getting rid of dollars. What'll happen is the dollars will be what is your checking account, and Bitcoin would become your savings account. So you would be able to store your value in Bitcoin and spend your dollars, and it's interchangeable. You can buy Bitcoin with dollars and then turn Bitcoin back into dollars. So it's, completely exchangeable, but I'll let him explain the best ways to actually buy it.
So what was your question one more time?
How would you go about purchasing, like, let's say you wanted to purchase food or groceries with Bitcoin, because how would we transition over to that?
Yeah, so it's way too early for that right now. So only about 1% of the world owns Bitcoin. About half of Americans own it. But in the United States, Bitcoin is taxed as property. And what that means is when you spend it, you have to declare that to the IRS, and you have to tell them what you paid for the Bitcoin, what it was worth when you spent it. And if there's a difference, you have to pay a tax on that. And so the IRS is actually prohibiting or slowing down Bitcoin being used as currency in the US. If you go outside the US, like in Germany, Singapore, Hong Kong, Switzerland, Portugal, Bitcoin's tax-free. So people use it as currency over there. But here in the US, it's not really used as currency. It's used as a savings account, like Kelly said. So if you have extra dollars that you don't want diluted by future government printing, then you could store that in Bitcoin. And if you have Venmo, if you look at your Venmo app down at the bottom, it says crypto, tap on that button, and then it gives Bitcoin in there. And you can, buy $50 worth of Bitcoin. And whenever you get extra dollars, you can just buy more Bitcoin and use that as a savings account. PayPal offers Bitcoin. There are exchanges out there that offer Bitcoin, like River Financial, Swan Bitcoin, Coinbase. So there's all sorts of ways to buy Bitcoin out there. If you have a brokerage account at like Schwab or Fidelity, there are Bitcoin mutual funds out there. They're called Bitcoin ETFs. You can put some of your, investments into Bitcoin through an ETF. So there's all sorts of ways to get exposure. But the main point is that it's too early to use it as currency in the US, but eventually that will change.
How the film talks a lot about censorship and about people cutting off money as a punishment from the government. How is this, how can it help counter these anti-Christian ideologies?
Yeah, so those are called central bank digital currencies, or the short name is a CBDC. And so CBDCs are money issued out by the governments or federal banks, and then they have control over your money. And so the scary thing is that, if the government doesn't like what you said, they could turn off your electronic wallet, or they could limit you to how you spend your money. Like, we don't like what you said about us, so you can only buy food, but you can't use it to buy a plane ticket, or use it for Uber, or or travel anywhere. Or if you go 50 miles outside of where you live, your wallet won't work. And so that's what they do in China today. And so and then the Chinese people are controlled by the government because the government has control over their wallet. And so in the United States and in most of the world, we don't want that type of control. So Bitcoin is the exact opposite of a CBDC. A central bank digital currency is controlled by like a small group of people. Bitcoin is not controlled by anybody. It's open source software. It's freedom technology. No one controls it. No one could block it. I could spend it whenever I want, and no one has the ability to stop me doing financial transactions with Bitcoin.
And it's not just the CBDC that governments can stop your behavior with. They did it in Canada with the trucker strike that we saw during COVID, when the truckers were protesting having to get the vaccine. They went in and shut down those truckers' bank accounts so that to force them to comply. And so it's not just a CBDC they can do that with. We see governments using their own fiat, their own decreed money to do that as well. But Bitcoin, you can't do that with.
In the film, it says it could be an ultimate force for good. Can you explain that? Because I think that's a pretty powerful statement.
Yeah. So one of the points we make in the movie is that when governments print more money, they use some of that money to conduct unjust wars. And the way wars used to be funded is that the government would use their own gold or their own treasury to do that. And when they ran out of gold or money, they would borrow the money from their citizens through what are called war bonds. So if the government came to me and said, "Hey, will you buy a war bond to support this war?" I had a choice. I could either buy a war bond to support the war, or I wouldn't buy the war bond. And so if the government couldn't sell their war bonds, they couldn't conduct the war. And if they ran out of gold, they couldn't conduct the war. So the wars would end. But what the governments do today is they just keep printing more and more money. So the wars never end. And so Bitcoin, because there's a limited supply and the governments can't print it, and if they can't print it, and if we were on a Bitcoin standard around the world, then it would limit the amount of wars that we have. And so in the Bible it says, thou shalt not kill. And so Bitcoin actually enables that, that truth that we shouldn't kill. And so if the world's on a Bitcoin standard, then the governments will be limited in their ability to conduct these unjust wars. And so we'll have more peace and harmony around the world because Bitcoin's that technology that will enable that.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add about your film that I haven't asked?
I think that we are trying to get the word out. We have released the movie for free. You can go on to our website, godblessbitcoin.com, watch it free there. You can download it there. So if you wanted to have a viewing party or a church group wanted to use it, we've made it that way because we believe that the people who are most hurt by our current financial system are the ones who do not have the extra disposable income to pay for a movie. And we're trying to spread the story about it to as many people as we can. And our goal is 1 billion views. So if you watch it and you like the message, we ask that you share it with as many people as possible and help spread the message that Bitcoin is hope.
Well, thank you so much. I love that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for
Thank you.
taking the time to interview us today.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you.
for taking the time to speak with me.